requisite for professional and independent journalism. My name is Elisabet Cantenys. I'm the Executive Director at the ACOS Alliance. We are a coalition that brings together news organizations, journalism NGOs, and freelance associations to really create and embed a culture of safety. Day one, and my voice already kind of like gone, so forgive me, but this is Perugia. I'm very excited to introduce you to our panel. They are longtime colleagues, and I'm privileged to say that they are friends as well. Next to me, I have Maria Salazar. She's the Director of Newsroom Safety and Resilience at the New York Times, and she's also the ACOS President. We have Alex Papachristou, who is the Executive Director at the Vance Center for International Justice, Chris Lawton, who is co-founder and director at Silk Road Training, and Silvia Battaglia, who is an award-winning freelance journalist who's been covering quite extensively the Middle East. So we do have a big problem here because we've put ourselves such a big title for this session, right? The fundamentals of safety, and we only have 30 minutes. So wish us luck. I thought we could focus on two things mainly. One is the importance of being prepared. And I also want to bring the case of the safety clinics, because this is a very concrete example, a very concrete initiative that I think has been run for quite a few years very successfully, that it's really very much in line with the idea or the importance of being prepared. Okay, Maria, I want to start with you because our profession, our journalist profession, is risky by nature. Can you tell us a little bit about the importance of being prepared when we can't really raise threats?
Oh, I have mine. I thought we were sharing. Yeah, actually, can you hear me?
I think, yeah.
Something that's very interesting that's happened in the long 20 years that I've been doing this is that what we think of frontline journalism has changed. It has really gone, and I'm talking about how we think about it, it's gone from the traditional way of thinking about conflict reporting into really most beats have risk right now. If you're reporting about education, you're very likely to face online harassment. So like you say, there's risk everywhere, and really journalism wouldn't be journalism without it. So there's no way to erase threats, but what we need to do is build a structure in which we're thinking about risk. We're identifying different kinds of risk. Again, there's physical risk when you're doing conflict reporting, and there's online risk when you're doing education reporting. So identifying the different types of risk that are linked to your story, that are linked to the work that you do, and building a response mechanism that allows you to think when you are in the face of threat, oh, yes, I thought about this, and this is how I'm going to respond to it, and this is how I'm going to get out of this particular threat. So there's no way to erase them, but if your structure is in place, you can be creative and you can be flexible while doing your work.
Thank you. Chris, can I jump to you? How can we be better prepared? What are the fundamental elements that you would say that we need to adopt to keep ourselves safe?
So I'm going to use two examples for that, because that's really diverse, actually. And they're both quite recent. So the first one's related to Ukraine, and the second one's related to Cambodia over the past year. And the first one, when we were looking at Ukraine, and this is probably a challenge a lot of you will have faced, is around the difficulties of getting insurance, having confidence in the support that you could have when you're in country. And if you cast your mind back not too long ago, it was quite a difficult situation to understand for a little while, and quite hard to know where people could go to, but more importantly, how they could get out, not just out of the direct area, but also out of the country in that instance. And I remember working directly with one freelancer, and she was talking about the difficulties and the costs of getting insurance, but also the practical application of that. And one of the big things that needed to be understood was what that insurance would actually do and what it would actually change. And it wasn't so much that we there wasn't sort of a magic, we couldn't save a magic wand and solve her problems. But what we could do with the preparedness question for that is make her understand what was feasible and what actually was achievable and what could be done, so that when she's taking whatever risk she chooses to take, and that's one of the things that I love about working with journalists, is in these situations they do push to find out the information, you do push the envelope. Sometimes that's what you do to find out such important things. But she understood what she was getting into, and the difference between doing that in an informed way and doing it with blindly is such a key differentiation. The other example in Cambodia, and this is a very different sort of risk, where you almost had a sort of creeping incursion on that civil space, where journalists, media workers, environmental activists were finding it harder and harder to work, increasing restrictions placed on them by corporate organisations as well as the government, sometimes in quite sort of difficult to put your finger on, difficult to understand ways. And so for them, the sort of the preparedness and the understanding of the risk was more about when they could recognise and how the techniques they could use to recognise when that risk, that threat to them, had become so significant that they could do something about it and what could be done. What does a safe haven look like? What preparedness measures would they need to take to leave the country, for example? If they can't leave the country, what could they do internally to keep themselves as safe as possible? And again, sometimes these are quite small tweaks to the way people behave, but it's about almost an informed understanding. The other major benefit, which you sort of touched on there, is the psychological benefit of that as well, because both of those have a risk of sort of varying different degrees of stress, from that sudden high impact, working in a conflict zone, through to that creeping stress on the mind and the body of working in a difficult, oppressive environment, for example. One of the best things that anyone can do for that is to understand the operating environment they're in. And if you sort of mentally rehearse the challenges that you could face, you mentally rehearse the worst case scenarios, what you could potentially do about it, the mental benefits and your ability to deal with that, to cope with that stress, to recover, and then to be able to keep doing your work are vastly improved. So it's not just a practical get yourself to safety, it's also about keeping yourself working and sustaining yourself in what can be a really difficult and challenging environment.
And in a way, Chris, what you're referring to is safety as an enabling.
Absolutely.
It's really enabling us, empowering us. Can you talk very briefly about what the safety clinics are? Because this is something that came from you. This I would say, your germ. What are the safety clinics? Is this safety training?
Yeah, so obviously we came up with the idea a few years ago because most journalists will benefit from some level of safety or security advice. So whatever level you work at, be that for some of the biggest organizations in the world, or if you're just starting out in your career and you're wondering how you can do your practice professionally, how you can act competently, so how you can hold your head up high and generally improve what you're doing. And we figured there's a need to start at that level where it's not about money, it's not about access, you can just come and ask questions. So the safety clinics can benefit from organizations who are working in places like Cambodia, Myanmar, and they're perhaps thinking about how can we build a safety framework, how can we improve safety and security, digital security, mental health preparedness as part of our newsroom operation. How do we build it right at the core level? It can also function at a granular level. For example, there was a couple of INGO workers killed in Ukraine fairly recently by a drone strike. Most journalists were aware of that and were able to report on it, but the so what is, what would you do if there was a drone strike? What are your actions in response to that particular threat? So it can also be if you have a particular granular question about a behavior on the ground. So everything from, how do you structure your organization to make it a safer working environment, through to how do you work as an individual in relation to a changing threat. Whatever the question is, you can come and you can ask it. That's what the safety clinics are. It's a safe space with perhaps not so much me, but certainly the other people available on the clinics, genuine experts, real experts, it's a fantastic place to come and get that face-to-face time with these people. And, you know, they'll give you whatever support they can. They'll be really, really generous with it. So, you know, that's what they are.
Yeah. We've put here a QR because there's still some spots left for anyone who wants to have that one-to-one 50-minute with these wonderful experts at the Hotel La Rosetta. So please, you know, access the application form. We still have some spots left, and we're here until Saturday. And Alex, I want to jump to you about, you can tell us a little bit more about the legal clinics, and if you can give us some examples of how you can help someone who needs advice and on that front.
Sure. I've participated over the past couple of years, and it's a little bit like Charlie Brown, the cartoon, where I think it's the doctor is in. You can come in and just describe a problem you have, and get some sort of not formal legal advice on the spot, but some ideas, some guidance, but more importantly, to start a relationship with a lawyer that can extend beyond Perugia. It may even be that you don't have a problem, or you don't know you have a problem, but you can still start that relationship, because who knows, next week you might get a lawsuit or a summons or whatever. And then you actually have somebody to call, and with the hope that you can get some legal assistance. And I've started a number of attorney-client relationships, as we call them, with journalists here at Perugia who've just come in and in some cases had some sort of an issue which we discussed, but in other cases really just wanted to start a relationship. You know, the legal risks that journalists face are of course manifold. When I hear though about the physical risks and the psychological risks, of course I feel a little embarrassed because a lawyer can't really help with that sort of physical safety. But you know, it's everything. It's not just a lawsuit, right? It's a tax audit. That's what Maria Ressa faced for so long, tax prosecution. It's money laundering investigation, which is what El Faro faced for so long. It's a new law that restricts an organization from receiving funding from outside. That's quite a trend. And so if you're set up in your country as a nonprofit organization, suddenly you're not allowed to receive money from outside of your country. So what lawyers can do besides defending you in court is help you ahead of time to structure your operations legally to avoid new restrictions or deal with new laws that might restrict your business operations. And you can reorganize yourselves in a different legal form. You can move to a different jurisdiction. You can take advantage of international investment treaties. There are different mechanisms that with lawyers you can explore to be more legally safe. And then, of course, if you do have a threat or a claim of a lawsuit, you can hope to find a lawyer who can work on a pro bono basis, so you don't have to pay because you can't pay, or you can try to get insurance ahead of time. There is a new program that everyone should look into called Reporters Shield. And my organization and OCCRP are the co-founders of this, but it is an independent organization. You can sign up online, or you apply online. Your organization can be a member, and then you get legal defense against any lawsuit in most any country in the world paid by this organization. So that's a great resource. And in some cases, lawyers will look at your stories or your broadcasts or podcasts ahead of time and advise you how to minimize the legal risks that they pose. So lawyers may not be the ones you think of as your likeliest friends here in Perugia or anywhere else, but we are available to give you the sort of guidance that you wish you didn't have to have. I think it's like going to the doctor and you don't really want to know what's the matter, right? But it's probably better that you find out, right? So you don't get really sick. So anyway, think of the lawyer that way.
Sounds very inviting.
I could have said dentist. That would have been even better.
Oh, that's a different level. That's a different level. No, but I really like what you say, Alex. These clinics are 50 minutes, but then you can establish a relationship that goes beyond those 50 minutes. And that's quite crucial. And Alex is a good example where you've had developed that, long-term relationship with a client, on a pro bono basis here. Laura, I want to jump because you are the only freelancer here in this panel. It's very important that we hear from you. What are the particular challenges that you face as a freelancer when it comes to being prepared?
Okay, thank you, Elisabet, and thanks for having me in this panel. And I'm here the only freelancer, and as some of you know, we still have the Frontline Freelancer Register that try to bring all the freelancer community together. And I can say that the problems are more or less similar, but there's one problem we have less than before, especially after COVID. Our relation with editors and broadcasters is much more better because we understand we are all on the same plate, and I think we finally understood that we are a community. And I think COVID really played a big role in this. But still, the problems we have, and I can speak not only for myself, but for the community, is still having access to tool or having the possibility to find tools in the places where we are, considering the fact that freelancers actually are, if we consider war in Ukraine, but if we consider also what's going on in Gaza, or we consider what's going on in Lebanon, are still a huge part of the community that brings stories to broadcasters. So, and this is really important. You don't find usually PPE. You don't find a way to move the PPE from one place to another. So, for example, last month when Samir Kassir Foundation opened a new hub for us, it's really good. It's really good also to know that there are trainers close to you. That's what we did in Ukraine in that 2 years. The first year was absolutely good to have trainers directly on the fields, and a lot of freelancers, Ukrainian colleagues, were trained and they got the PPE, which is really safe, considering also the costs. Second, we still have problem with insurances, which is, I think, the most important point to talk about, to work about. And still there's a problem to the access, the numbers of insurances, what they cover, and all the risk we face, considering that we spend our money directly into risk assessment, safety, if we really want to be safe and thinking strategically about how to report better and being safe and somehow. Last but not least, I just want to share something, a little bit of my experience on the safety clinics, which is the one-to-one session. It's really a good thing, because usually we have trainings and we have workshops, we are a lot of people, it's fun, you stay together, you learn how to do, emergency, everything, but at the end of the day, if you have a personal problem, you will try to find the trainer out of the room, and then you struggle, and then the trainer will go because it's really busy. Clinics are so good because you can really establish a personal relation, something's really tailored for you. And even though this doesn't happen, the point is that you never know what could happen in your life. My experience was that last year, Elisabet brought here an amazing psychotherapist, and actually she really helped me for 1 year to face the real threats of my life after more or less 20 years reporting the death and the loss of my husband due to a brain cancer. And this became a great relation, really a huge help for me, because sometimes also, you say, okay, work, I'm prepared, but you never know what life brings, what happened in your life. And when personal matters cross a work such intense, could be really something really disturbing if you don't think in advance about it. So join us to the safety clinics.
Thanks for sharing, Laura. Before we open up to the floor, I wanted to say two things. One is that please look at the program. There are several sessions around safety. Laura mentioned risk assessment. At 11, there is another session on risk assessments. Please have a look. The second thing that I want to say is that it takes a village. This is a joint effort. We have CPJ, the Rory Peck Trust, and we have amazing trainers, and some of them are here, so I want to make sure I name absolutely everyone. Alison Baskerville from Reuters, you're here, please stand up. Yamil Bukai, Carlos Gallo from Media Defense, Harlow Holmes from Freedom of the Press Foundation, Nicola from IREX, Elodie from PEN America, Lauren Walsh. You are amazing, and I mean, I know some of you are here, maybe you're too shy to stand up, but thank you so much. As I was saying, it really takes a village. We want to open it up. Let me see how much time we have left. So we have 10 minutes. We're good. We're good. Questions? No hands. It's too early.
Whilst people are just thinking, 'cause sometimes it can take a moment to digest, there's just a couple of points, if you're thinking, is this quite, to frame your thinking if you are thinking about doing any of the clinics, and a couple of the opportunities that come within it. The first is that most training and most advice you get is relatively generic, particularly if you're looking at online resources or you're looking sort of more encyclopedic. Having a one-on-one time is an ability to put you at the center of the risk, so who you are directly right in front of it, and the ability to ask questions and to frame a particular context or particular set of threats or a particular operating environment around you and what it means for you to be working in there. So that's something I'd really encourage you to consider if you are thinking about it. And the other aspect, and it's almost the other end of the spectrum, is that increasingly, for many of you, if you look at Gaza, for example, or you look at the environmental story in certain parts of the world as well, often there's an increasing reliance on indigenous peoples and activists and local journalists as well. And one of the things that certainly I've seen over the past couple of years is that thinking through the risk and what can be done to support those people who we all rely on is often under-considered. So if that's something, and those two huge stories, for example, if that's something that impacts on you or is in a direction that you might be thinking of going, trying to have a conversation about it early within the planning stages is really, really important, because if you can build it into the fabric of things right from the beginning, it makes the application of sensible safety, security, legal, digital factors so much easier than if you're trying to overlay it just as you're actually doing the story. So if that's something that you're either interested in, or, as I said, that opportunity to put yourself in the middle of something, this is the right time to start those conversations.
True, and I think you're also referring to identity at the center of that discussion. Sorry, I couldn't see who. Yeah.
Hello, Scott Wallace from the University of Connecticut and a National Geographic contributor. I was wondering about what your thoughts are about whether, when you're going into a country, maybe for the first time, do you go in as a tourist or do you identify yourself as a journalist? And both choices, I think, have different risks. Thank you.
Who wants to take these? Alex.
Well, I think it's a bad idea to go in as a tourist. If you're there to be a journalist, you declare yourself a journalist and take whatever consequences there are in terms of surveillance or even interrogation or registration or whatever it might be. What you don't want to be is caught as a journalist, but with a tourist visa. Then you're probably in a lot of trouble.
If I can add a little snippet there, it's sort of piggybacking into some of what we've discussed before, you need to think about the consequences to the wider environment in that case, and not only to yourself, but if you decide to go in as a tourist, what are the consequences going to be to other journalists working there? Is that going to put them in a different risk category, or what could be the legal implications? So, like Alex, I would encourage you.
And also the consequences to the other tourists. I mean, no, I don't mean that only facetiously, because it would potentially pose a risk to people who were just innocently visiting if they were suddenly suspected of actually investigating.
And what if you can't get in as a journalist? I mean, there are instances in which your visa request will be denied. So that's really the situation I'm asking about.
Chris.
So, at the risk of slightly being at odds, there are situations in what I wouldn't necessarily just say tourist, but I'd say trying to enter into a location discreetly. And as you say, as colleagues have said, there are multiple risks. It's one of the riskiest things you could do, actually, if I'm being really honest. But one of the things that should probably come and have a chat, because one of the things you should be doing, as they say, is conducting a risk assessment. And if it's worth it, if it's really, really worth it, then it could be a risk worth taking. But the risks are multiple, and in most situations, because there you're probably looking at a really shallow civil space, and probably some really, really severe consequences of being found out, not just for yourself, but for other people as well. The risks are going to be really, really high. So, you have to be totally confident that it's worth it. You have to be thoroughly conversant with the risks. Be totally confident in the measures that you're taking to maintain that discretion, which relates to your activity on the ground, what you could actually do, what you could actually investigate, report, cover. It's quite complex. It's one of the most difficult things you can do well, and it's also one of the most high-risk things you could do. So, you can take whatever risks you like, but my advice would be entirely sure that it's going to be worth it, and that you've got enough to support you, protect you, and other people around you.
Thank you. I think is that editorial value versus risk, right? And how far you're able to go, but definitely being intentional. I think we have 1 minute for you. Yeah. No pressure.
No, I just wanted to add to that, because that's a bit theoretical. I think you need to know the country where you are, and there are countries where there's kind of tacit understanding that to enter as a tourist and don't bother us. And you need to know these situations. You need to talk to people on the ground. But I wouldn't subscribe to a general rule that don't do this at all. You need to know where you are and where you're going.
And that's part of what the risk assessment is about, no? Chris, you wanted to add something? Laura, please.
Yeah, on this regard, I just want to share my experience. I decided to enter as a tourist only once in Iran in 2011, during the time of Ahmadinejad. But the risk assessment was done very well, and with a cover story, of the two entering and sneaking into. But I can say that the feeling of the surveillance was really high, and it was worth it, honestly. We were reporting about religious minorities, and people, don't like them, basically. But was worth it. But just want to say another point. It's right that you have to know very well the country. You have to know very well the language. You have to know very well the culture, because maybe you will not catch some signs if something is happening around you. And in some cases also, you could use, if you have the chance, a family visa. That's what's happening often to me in Yemen. Sometimes I can say that entering a country, I will not recommend to do that. It's something really exceptional, and only if it's worth it. But sometimes I ask myself if it's worth it when, for example, you get into a country with a journal visa, because militias allow you to go into, and they ask you $6,000 per person, and then with this money they show you only starving children, and then basically you are fueling them and buying, because they will buy Kalashnikovs or whatever. So I think we have also to ask ourselves, yes, if it's worth it, but also if we are fueling more the war inside, just to show people something that they want to be shown. And this is for me, it's really a question that matters.
Maria, we have one last thought.
Yeah, last thought, and it's, again, going back to risk assessments, just to bring you to the clinics, and that's, you don't only want to be thinking about the risk when you're doing your risk assessment in a situation like this, you also want to be thinking about if the worst happens, what are you going to do? And you need to be prepared for that, and that's a huge chunk of the risk assessment. If you're arrested, I know, we're done, who is going to help you get out? That will be a really big part of that thinking, and with that.
Thank you so much, Maria. Thank you, Laura, Chris, and Alex. Thank you, everyone here, for caring so much about safety.